American democracy faces a growing crisis of ethics and integrity. Not my words, but the words of former US Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. Everyone assumes he is referring to the behavior of his former boss, President Donald Trump. Tillerson didn't mention Trump by name, but the way he said it left little room for doubt. He even added, "If we do not, as Americans, confront the crisis of ethics and integrity in our society and among our leaders in both the public and private sector, then American democracy as we know it is entering its twilight years." Some see Trump's international interventions as ludicrous. He has tried to dismantle the historic nuclear deal with Iran, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, agreed in 2015 between Iran, America, France, Britain, Russia, China and Germany. He's withdrawn from an international climate change treaty. He's threatened North Korea. He's been inconsistent over Syria, opposing missile strikes, then ordering them himself, as well as moving US troops into Syria, but then talking about pulling them back out again. And then there's his social network activity. Trump has repeatedly made statements not backed up by fact. For example, he insisted the crowds at his January 2017 inauguration were bigger than those for his predecessor Barack Obama. Former FBI Chief James Comey reflects a widely held public view when he said of Trump, "I don't think he's medically unfit to be president. I think he's morally unfit to be president." Mr. Comey went on to accuse the president of being a liar, perhaps reflecting why there has been so much public protest since Trump came to power. Should other countries follow Donald Trump's lead and seek to abandon the Iran nuclear deal? And what else does Trump have in store for the world during his presidency? Simple questions with important and potentially worrying answers. For example, consider this. Trump warned Barack Obama not to attack Syria in 2013, but then Trump attacked Syria himself as president. Why does he contradict his own positions? We put that to the public. Here's what they said.
Because of the people that he chose in his cabinet, it was pretty easy to anticipate his kind of tendency towards the conflicts in Syria, and so I was not surprised at all.
I believe he had his own reasons to do that, but now he's in charge. He's the president of the United States of America, so he's making decisions by himself.
Trump is like a big kid on the playground messing around with, and he's like, he will just want to do opposite what Barack Obama did.
The decision of Trump contradicts what he warned Obama, yes, but he is just trying to prove that America is the world's superpower. I see the attack as part of his Make America Great Again policy. He is trying to show his power on the world stage.
Trump said a lot of things which his actions later contradicted. I don't think Trump looks at his campaign promises as being especially important to keep.
We should be honest that all of the developed world's economies are based on the arms trade. I think what he did was positive for Syrians, even if Trump didn't actually do it to help Syrians. This doesn't mean that I am in favor of Trump.
Trump changes his views like you and I change our shirts. He's totally unpredictable. Is it Trump who decides this, or his advisors? Who knows? His thought process is totally mysterious.
Even Obama, who had far more ability, attacked Syria as well, but with drones. So I think Trump is really just continuing the same policy, even if he is more militaristic and doesn't care at all if the Middle East is destabilized.
Trump changes his ideas whenever it suits him. He told Obama not to strike Syria because it would harm America's relation with Russia. And then we were told that Trump and Russia had many links prior to his elections. Now that he is president, we see that he has escalated the violence in Syria, and unfortunately, I think that is a good thing.
I wish it was just the only thing that Trump has contradicted. I mean, it seems that he's making a living out of contradicting, and the reality is that he was when he was running for president, and indeed when he was even not running for president, he was criticizing the American government for their policy in Middle East and saying that we want to get out, there's nothing in it for us, we're just spending money, we're wasting our resources, our people are suffering. And indeed, since he has come to power, he's done nothing except sort of spending money in bombs and policy, which is creating further conflict and spending huge amount of resources with no result whatsoever. So, and you know, when you look at his whole sort of campaign and his own policy, he contradicts himself on a day-to-day basis and even minute-to-minute basis. So here we go.
I think that Donald Trump was basically anti-engagement in the Middle East, and indeed at various times he had said himself that America's got nothing out of this. He's looked at it in business terms and said we spent trillions of dollars for no return. And then his advisors got round him and said, look, you can't do that. We are a major world power with huge interests in the Middle East, and you can't just unilaterally withdraw. So inevitably, America has got involved. And I think also there was, of course, the key element of ISIS, the fact that Daesh was there, that Daesh therefore was a legitimate reason for some sort of intervention, and that certainly was one of the factors that had to play. But he's not a Middle East expert by any means, and who knows what he may say about that tomorrow.
Trump wants to end the Iran nuclear deal and enforce sanctions against the Islamic Republic. But the European Union, including France, the United Kingdom and Germany, still back it. Does America's U-turn affect the deal? And should the European countries follow Trump and put pressure on Iran? We put that to the public. Here's what they said.
Europe will support Iran temporarily, and in the meantime, they will come up with a new plan to make up for this sudden decision that Trump made just on his own. To fix, yes, and I think it is a lot of responsibility on Europe now to make up for what mistake he made.
I believe we should follow our politics and to follow what's the best for us instead of doing what other heads of the country is doing right now.
A lot of people are suffering for many, many years. I think they will focus in doing much more better, not on going worse, from bad to worse. So.
The blockade against Iran is something that the US can't do without Russia, and they are going to follow the deal. It's clear that Trump is trying to increase tensions in the area to destabilize the allies of Russia and to discredit Barack Obama.
I hope that the agreement will continue, because this was a global agreement. Just because the US is pulling out, it shouldn't change anything. But that's really not the way the world works. The US is a superpower, so their actions count more.
The problem once again is that it all comes down to religion in this area. Yes, Iran makes people scared, but so do other countries. We really should have seen this coming, but honestly, Iran doesn't scare me as much as they used to. We see that Trump is not going to honor US agreements with North Korea either.
This is a big mistake by the US to withdraw. This took years of negotiation with Iran. We see that France and other European countries are going to stick with the treaty, and I'm glad about that.
The reality is that United States traditionally has been leading international policies of the West, and wherever they actually decided to do something, including Gulf War and everything else, and the rest of Europeans, in particular Britain, has said, how high should I jump? As soon as United States say jump, but now we see that people really don't want to follow these buffoons. And Trump is actually undermining the sort of the power and legitimacy of the policy of United States. So, and it's not just over the issue of the nuclear deal with Iran. It's the issue of the issue of the sort of tariffs, and indeed goes far beyond that. What it remains is to see if Europe is just giving lip service, saying that we're not going to follow you, or indeed is not going to follow, or indeed will go further and be an obstacle to US's policy, and that is remains to be seen.
The American withdrawal from the nuclear agreement with Iran was a huge setback and caused much upset in Europe, not only in London, Paris and Berlin, which are the three capitals that are actually engaged with the thing, but right across the EU. It was impressive how immediately the whole 27, through Federica Mogherini, the European Union High Representative, came out and said, this is wrong, we want to keep him there, keep it going. But this is going to be quite difficult because the Americans are threatening sanctions against European companies which trade with Iran. And of course for Europe, the whole point about the deal was not only to bring Iran into the fold again of international relations, but to exploit business opportunities. So it's a very tricky road ahead and will depend very much on how Europe can stand up to America when it comes to sanctions. And of course now how we respond to Iran's request that we pay some of the money that America is not going to.
Why does Trump back Israel, despite the alleged genocide against Palestinians, while at the same time attacking Syria with missiles over very similar allegations? The public said this.
The only victims are the civilians in the area, and it's very sad. But it's always been like that. Like ever since I was a little kid, I heard a lot about these conflicts in Palestine and in Israel and in Gaza, and it's just never ending.
Trump knows that China has never respected the climate protocol and that this has given China economic advantages. He wants the US to make money, not save the planet.
I'm against what Trump has done. Totally against it. The Palestinian question is a debate which has been going on for years, and which is not easy to solve. But this was a mistake.
This real problem is arms sales. As long as the EU and the US cares about arms, money more than anything else, they will talk out of both sides of their mouth and bomb countries to show off their weapons. We must be realistic that the military controls the economy.
The answer is very simple. There is a powerful pro-Zionist lobby in the US, but we cannot compare their attacks in Syria to what is happening in Palestine at all.
Trump hasn't really done anything wrong. We saw 70 people die in the occupied territories this week, women, children and protesters, and people who have good reason to protest.
Well, the reality is that policy of Trump, if you actually look at the policy of Trump is to sort of be a cheerleader for his supporters. And the supporters are evangelical Christian Zionists, supporters of people of mid-America, rednecks, and that types of people. He is actually speaking to them. He's not speaking to the general political establishment of the United States or the international community or people who follow human rights or the people who want a better justice in the world. He is actually concentrating on this group of people, and he's also getting international support from Zionist lobby with the finances of Saudi Arabia. He's calculated that this is the way he will stay in power and indeed will be re-elected next time. And he's playing that game. It's actually a calculated game, but it's a game that brings death and destruction and chaos to the rest of the world.
I think there are two main reasons why Donald Trump has shown himself to be a real friend of Israel, as he would see it. One is the family, of course, because his daughter Ivanka is married to Jared Kushner. She became Jewish and has got very, very involved in the whole Israeli scene. But the other issue is, of course, the pro-Israel lobby, AIPAC, in America is extremely strong, and he wants to please that constituency because he knows those are the sorts of people who voted for him, who ensured that he actually got into the White House. I don't think he personally understands the lack of logic in his position when it comes to contrasting his stance on Israel and the situation of the Palestinians and his declared stance on Syria. I don't think he does logic. He does things by basically gut reaction, and we see that by the way that he communicates with the world through Twitter, often extremely intemperately. So basically, family ties and a lack of logic.
Let's look at some statistics, taking President Trump's first year as an example. In that time, he visited 14 countries, former President Obama visited 21 over the same period. After their first year as president, a poll of polls shows Obama's popularity was 49.6%. Trump's was 37.7%, the lowest for any president since the end of World War II. And after criticizing Obama for considering military interventions in Syria, Trump authorized attacks using 59 Tomahawk missiles against the Syrian government forces. The total number of missiles used by Obama against President Assad's forces was 0.
Does the public want the European Union to give up on the Paris Climate Change Treaty and other deals because the US is planning to walk out of them?
But Trump has his own reasons, and it's all based on economy and business. He's a businessman, he's not a politician. And whatever there is some kind of profit for him, he will go for it. So one of them is war, and they need to sell their guns, and the money should keep running.
Maybe not follow, but maybe a bit inspired, because I'm not saying that everything what he does is wrong. Opposite, he apparently is a very successful man, so I believe we should take suggestions of his, but not really follow what he does.
The European Union and America, they should concentrate on how should help economically and to be more stable.
Trump certainly creates a lot of problems and tensions, but there are plenty of environmental scandals in the world, not just with Trump and the US. Trump wants to create crises in order to distract people from his many scandals with Russia and elsewhere.
Of course Trump withdrew. He's a climate change denier. He's obviously wrong. And this is one of the most important issues of our time. Every country must adhere to the treaty, but even if the US doesn't, we can't stop fighting climate change.
The Treaty of Paris involved dozens of countries, not just the US. It's the same problem with the Americans. They want to lead the global order and be its policeman too. Trump's decision is not the right path, and we must remember that he doesn't represent the average American any more than Macron represents the average Frenchman.
The withdrawal of the Americans is not logical, but it is in their economic interest. It's obviously a scandal. COP21 was a major success for the whole world and signed by the US and China, but Trump doesn't want China to surpass the US in terms of economic power.
In reality, Europe is really in a dilemma right now. The fact of the matter is that would Europe stand up against traditional leadership of United States in international affairs and sort of try to go it on its own? Or indeed, would it become sort of an obstacle to it? Would it try to organize itself on its own merits and in all views? I really think that when you take all the issues, issues of tariffs on international goods, issue of climate change, issue of Iran deal, and goes on and on and on, Europe has got no choice, has got to actually make a break from Trump's United States. And really, I think the sooner they do that and the sooner they put an alternative thing, it would be better not just for the European, but for the rest of the world. And I think now we are really seeing some movements on that front. And it really depends how far they would go. But if they don't do it now, in another 6 months, a year, they have to bite that bullet, because you can't really do any dealing in any sort of basis with the Trump's United States.
I think most sensible politicians around the world recognize that climate change probably is the biggest single threat that this planet and the population face. We get distracted by Brexit, and of course we get concerned by what's going on in the Middle East. But climate change is really about the future of our world and our sustainability within it. And it's absolutely essential that Europe does not drop the ball on this, that actually keeps running with it. And most of the rest of the world is absolutely on board, so that on this, and indeed in other issues, America's going to find itself very much on its own. Indeed, it's rather ironic when Trump campaigned for making America great again, perhaps he ought to have said making America alone again.
Some say the only way to stop Trump is to prosecute him in court. What does the public think? And what else might Trump have in store for us in the future if he stays?
I don't think anybody will take Trump to court, but I'm very optimistic about Europe.
I think he's going to cause a war.
He will not be chosen again, but you never know with people's mind.
We shouldn't dream. That is basically impossible. He was fairly elected and Trump has a huge force behind him. This will never happen, so the only thing to do is to ride out his term until the next election and elect a new president.
I know that in the US, those who oppose Trump are doing whatever they can. But I don't agree with it. Impeaching Trump would be very complicated, even from a legal point of view.
When Trump was elected, I made a bet with my friends that he would be impeached within 3 months. So I lost some money with that. The real problem is who would take his place. I wouldn't vote for Hillary Clinton, and I'm a feminist. Michelle Obama has said that she won't run, and she was right to say that a new generation needs to take over. Macron incarnates this in France somewhat.
Trump has been elected by the majority of Americans, and a majority of Americans support his policies of America First, which Trump thinks that will be able to relaunch their economy.
The problem with Trump is that he seems to do many things just to provoke, like a teenager does. He is the least diplomatic president ever. Just look at his constant tweets. He doesn't reflect or think. The decision regarding Jerusalem al-Quds is very complicated. It's very hard to find a diplomatic solution with so many different religions and ethnic groups.
I think that it really very much depends. The reality is that Trump does have a very strong support within the certain sections, but those certain sections are as mad as him in the United States. And if such an action is taken, the issue is what consequences will that have for the unity and the destruction within the United States. Because really, we shouldn't really ignore the fact that there are some hardcore loonies in the United States which are supporting the loony policies of Trump. So one day that has to happen. One day, United States has to stand up and say that, what really happened and try to put the books right. But I don't know if that would happen soon or later.
Of course, Donald Trump is upsetting many people in the United States, those who didn't vote for him and many members of Congress. So impeachment is a possibility, but it's actually very difficult to impeach a US president. They either have to violate the Constitution, and his advisors will try to make sure he doesn't do that, or to essentially destroy America's reputation through foreign policy. And it does mention foreign policy as a possibility, but it would be very difficult in Congress to, for example, say, because of your stance on Israel-Palestine, you're destroying America's reputation. They wouldn't buy it. So I think the likelihood of Trump actually being impeached is very small. But the threat of impeachment is important, and if the process actually began, then maybe that would bring him to heel, or at least dissuade him from standing again.
And what do you think we'll get if he is allowed to carry on? Make some future speculations.
I think it's very unlikely, personally, that Donald Trump will want to do a second term. I think that it's almost like a game for him, and he's enjoyed most of it, not all of it, but he's also getting quite a lot of egg on his face, and that's not good for his own personal standing. And I think that he may very well decide that actually once is enough and let someone else take this heavy burden instead.
The European Union, France, the United Kingdom and Germany have all expressed support for the deal, and Iran has repeatedly stated its nuclear program is peaceful and not designed to create atomic weapons. But Trump has carried on regardless.
Trump's former Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, said, "If our leaders seek to conceal the truth, then we as American citizens are on a pathway to relinquishing our freedom." Many feel that, in contrast to these warnings, President Trump continues to make political and diplomatic mistakes, untrue claims and ridiculous foreign policy decisions. Trump never set out to ruin America's credibility, but that could be his ultimate legacy. Instead of making America great again, he could make America alone again.